and bound him in prison for Herodias' sake, his brother Philip's wife, for he had married her. For John had said unto Herod, it is not lawful for thee to have thy brother's wife. Therefore Herodias had a quarrel against him, and would have killed him, but she could not, for Herod feared John, knowing that he was a just man and a holy man, and observed him, and when he heard him, he did many things and heard him gladly. And when a convenient day was come, that Herod on his birthday made a supper to his lords, high captains and chief estates of Galilee, and when the daughter of the said Herodias came in and danced and pleased Herod and them that sat with him, the king said unto the damsel, ask of me whatsoever thou wilt, and I'll give it thee. And he sware unto her, whatsoever thou shalt ask of me, I will give it thee, unto the half of my kingdom. And she went forth and said unto her mother, what shall I ask? And she said, the head of John the Baptist. And she came in straightway with haste unto the king, and asked, saying, I will that thou give me by and by in a charger the head of John the Baptist. And the king was exceeding sorry, yet for his oath's sake, and for their sakes which sat with him, he would not reject her. And immediately the king sent an executioner, and commanded his head be brought. And he went and beheaded him in the prison, and brought his head in a charger, and gave it to the damsel. And the damsel gave it to her mother. And when his disciples heard of it, they came and took up his corpse and laid it in a tomb.
All right. Thank you so much. I would like to thank Reverend Pennington for not only praying, but for reading to us from Mark 6, verses 14 through 29. May God bless the reading of the scripture tonight. God bless you, brother. Dear family, we're here now. We're going to be studying this text. And as you take your first listen to this, what are some things that stand out to you? What are some things that you think about? Maybe something that makes you scratch your head and wonder? Talk to me. All right. Well, let's just go through it. Let's just look at it.
And Reverend Rogers,
yes.
Good evening. I do have a question.
Sure.
About the part about he cut his head off. Is that true?
Yes.
Oh.
Question.
Yes.
Why would the dazzle ask of such an evil act?
Because she was offended by John the Baptist. John the Baptist had called out her he called her out. He called out her marriage. Let me see. Let me make sure it's either her marriage or her mother's marriage. Give me 1 second.
I believe it's her mother's marriage.
Yeah. John the Baptist. Here we are. All right. Here we are. For Herod himself had sent men who arrested John, bound him, and put him in prison on the account of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, because Herod had married her. For John had been telling Herod, it is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife. And Herodias had a grudge against him and wanted to kill him. So that's why Herodias had it in for John the Baptist. Okay. All right. Any other questions? All right. So John the Baptist preached the truth. He spoke to what was lawful and unlawful, and this made Herodias so mad, angered her so much that John the Baptist's head was demanded on a platter by Herodias's daughter. Excuse me, by Herodias herself. My apologies. And so John the Baptist ends up beheaded because of this. Okay, what are some other thoughts that you have tonight?
Pastor, good evening, everybody.
Good
Could
evening.
you give me the scripture, please, sir? I just
Okay.
tuned in late.
All right, Mark 6:14-29.
Thank you.
I think it's interesting, and by the way, it was Herodias' daughter who asked for his head.
Very good.
But it's interesting if you look at last part of verse 19 and then going into verse 20, it says she nursed a grudge and wanted to kill him, but she was not able to. And in verse 20, it says, because Herod feared John and protected him, knowing him to be a righteous and holy man.
Okay. Very good. Excellent. Yes. So let's talk about nursing a grudge. What's that? What does that mean? What does that look like to nurse a grudge?
Well, to me, it seemed like it's continually holding the party or the circumstances hostage.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
Or you're mad at somebody, or your feelings have been hurt, and you just keep, instead of letting it go, you just keep nursing it and holding on to it.
That's right. I think that sometimes people nurse grudges because some people use grudges like a certain currency, and they're waiting for the right time to cash in on that grudge. Does that make sense to you? So they're waiting for the right time to cash in on the grudge. So they don't.
It makes sense.
They don't let it go because there's something they want to get out of it, right? Whether it's revenge, beheading, in this case, very extreme, whether they want to use it to embarrass a person, humiliate a person, make a person feel guilty, or whether they want to hold it over a person's head forever. Anybody experienced that before?
Yes.
Okay. Very good.
Yes, sir.
All right. All right. And but before I get into my lesson for tonight, is anything else stand out about this text to you? Anything else odd to you?
I wouldn't say it's odd, but it connects to the 12 that were sent out. So because they were casting out demons and healing, I think King Herod started feeling guilty over what he had done to John the Baptist.
Okay. Yeah, I think that I think it's important for us to go over here to Matthew 14 real quickly. I'm going to read this account here from 1-12. It says, at that time, Herod the ruler heard reports about Jesus, and he said to his servants, this is John the Baptist. He has been raised from the dead, and for this reason, these powers are at work in him. For Herod had arrested John, bound him, and put him in prison on the account of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, because John had been telling him, it is not lawful for you to have her. Though Herod wanted to put him to death, he feared the crowd because they regarded him as a prophet. But when Herod's birthday came, the daughter of Herodias danced before the company, and she pleased Herod so much that he promised her an oath to grant her whatever she asked. Prompted by her mother, she said, give me the head of John the Baptist here on a platter. So Herodias is mother, and her daughter does the dance. And when Herod said, I'll give you whatever you want, the mother told the daughter to ask for John the Baptist's head on a platter. The king was grieved, yet out of regard for his oath and for the guests, he commanded it to be given. He sent and had John beheaded in prison. The head was brought on the platter and given to the girl who brought it to her mother being Herodias. his disciples came and took the body and buried it. Then they went and told Jesus. Now, there's one thing I'm hoping that we can see that it's just kind of odd about this text before we move on. I just want anybody want to call out something, interrogate this text for me. What is odd in this? And then I'll move on. There's something odd I'm trying to bring out. There's something odd. Can anybody see what's odd?
Reverend Rogers?
Yes.
I think that it was odd that the mother would use the daughter to have this man that she was at odds with killed.
Yes. That is odd. And but we see that, right? People will use their relatives, that will use children to get back at somebody else. It's tragic that she would use her daughter for such an evil act. That is odd. It should not be normal at all. Well, I'm just going to go ahead and point it out for the sake of time. So he gave an oath to do whatever she asked for. And so she asked for John the Baptist's head. And then it says in 26, and I'm surprised that none of you caught this. Now, I'm sure somebody going to say that you caught it after I say it, but next time, just say it, okay? I'm surprised because I know I got some sharp people in this class. It says the king was deeply grieved, yet out of regard for his oath and for his guests, he did not want to refuse her. Now, this just doesn't make much sense because, you made an oath, but you about to behead a person, and you shouldn't behead anybody, but you're about to behead a prophet of God. So which one is worse, breaking an oath or beheading a person?
Beheading.
Of course, so this, yes.
I think beheading is worse from our point of view, but you have to look at the culture at that time.
I'm definitely, yes. Go ahead.
Yeah, the Romans and the Greeks were, they had a rather, it's a good word, bawdy culture.
Yes.
This is the culture that had orgies, public orgies.
I agree. And I'm definitely considering the culture when I say this. Herod was faced with two different things. One was breaking the oath, and one was beheading a person. And even in light of the culture that they had, beheading a person, especially a prophet, is much worse than breaking an oath. It's much worse.
But he was also a Jew, and they didn't look at them as they didn't regard them as people.
Yeah, but I'm saying, but this would have been, Herod was appointed the king of the Jews. Herod would have been, Herod should have been obligated to the law of the Jews as the king of the Jews. That's why John the Baptist is calling him out. Well, John the Baptist is telling Herod it's not lawful for you to have your brother's wife. He's citing the law to him. He's citing the law because Herod is supposed to submit to the law, and Herod was breaking the law and doing unlawful things, and John the Baptist is preaching the law to him because Herod was supposed to identify with the same culture as John the Baptist. Herod was supposed to treat John the Baptist with the dignity of the Levitical, the Levitical legal code, and Herod is just in major violation of that. All right, he's in major violation. So yeah, Herod was supposed to be under the law, and honestly, which this was not the case for Herod, but the law of God, both the Deuteronomical law and the Levitical law, was supposed to take precedent over what Rome had to say. And we're going to get into that later. That's really what I'm building up to. That was supposed to take precedent. But beyond this isn't something that Rome had obligated Herod to do. This is something that Herod did because he was being wild. He was wild and out of control. And Herod says, I'm grieved because I made an oath. And so he moves forward to behead. And what I'm trying to show is that sometimes a wrong answer sometimes a bad choice is the good choice. Okay, so if that makes sense. So situational ethics, what I mean is that, so let's say that you were a German that lived in Nazi Germany, and you were a German that did not believe in the extermination of Jewish people. So you decide to hide Jewish people in your home, and they are in your basement. And one day the Fuhrer soldiers come to your home and they knock on your door and they say, are you hiding Jews here? And you're faced with the choice between lying and saying, no, I'm not hiding any Jews here, or saying I am, and the Fuhrer comes and takes them and kills them, right? So you are between two different choices. Both are wrong. One, sending people to be slaughtered, is wrong, and then one is lying. We know that, we don't want to be lying, but you have to make a choice between the two. And this is what Herod is faced with. Herod is faced with having to make a decision between breaking an oath, going back on his word, or beheading a prophet of God. And to me, it is odd. It's always been odd. It's odd that Herod said, I would rather not break an oath and instead behead a person. I believe that Herod made the wrong choice here. It would have been better for him to break that oath than to behead the prophet of God. I heard there was another comment, but before, I would like the previous comment to have an opportunity to follow up. All right. Who had the other comment? Uh-oh. Did I lose you? Who had the other comment? Okay. Any questions before I move on? Because I just want to make sure everybody's with me, because I don't want to lose anybody, because it's going to get even deeper than what it is now. So please ask a question before we go another layer into this. Okay, so I want to now spend a moment kind of looking at this philosophically, and from the topic as pragmatism as an obstacle to righteousness. Okay, so pragmatism as an obstacle to righteousness. So what we find here is we find one leader in this text who was being pragmatic. He didn't want to break his oath and he didn't want to do it in front of his guests. So he's thinking from a practical standpoint. But then you had another person who was thinking from a righteous standpoint, where he didn't care what the consequences were. He was going to tell the truth and preach the whole word of God, despite whatever the consequences were. And he did that all the way until paying the ultimate consequence, and that was being killed and being beheaded. I want to begin by just defining righteousness. Righteousness is the quality, state, or practice of judicial responsibility with focus on fairness, justice, equitableness. Also, righteousness is an attribute which stems from covenantal relationship. Thus, righteousness is a state of integrity in relation to God and one's fellow man, expressing itself in one's acts and speech. Okay, how would you define righteousness before we move to pragmatism? Anybody there? Anybody care to define righteousness?
With one word, I could say he's doing what's right.
Okay, doing what's right. Thank you. Yes, very good. All right, let's go on to pragmatism. Pragmatism is a philosophical system that assumes that every truth or idea has practical consequence, and that these practical consequences are a critical test of its truthfulness. Some pragmatists add that there are no transcendental sources of truth. Therefore, truth and values are relative to their usefulness to either individuals or societies. Okay. So can anybody give me an example, or can anybody explain to me what does this first sentence mean? Maybe somebody can break this down for us tonight before I do. A philosophical system that assumes that every truth or idea has practical consequences, and that these practical consequences are a critical test of its truthfulness. So what does that mean? What's that mean? That means that a person judges something as truth based on how it works out. Do you understand? You understand? So a pragmatist will judge something as truth, as right, based on how practical it is, based on its practical consequences. Okay? Can anybody think of an example of that? A philosophical system that assumes that every truth or idea has practical consequences, and that these practical consequences are a critical test of its truthfulness. If we can't think of an idea, can anybody tell me what is a problem with this? Anybody?
So, I was going to ask you, Reverend Roger. So then it depends on the person and what their belief system is, right? Because when they used to lynch slaves, or lynch not slaves, but black people, the people who were doing it, well, they were correct, and the end result showed that what they did was correct and the person deserved it. But that wasn't necessarily true. Well, no, it wasn't true.
Okay, so yeah, so I think using slavery is a good example. One could, a pragmatist could say slavery makes a lot of money. Slavery gets things built fast, and it's going to cost a major war, a lot of blood shed, a lot of money to get rid of it. So because the end result, or at least to get to abolition, is going to be so painful because of civil war, and so costly because of the loss of all of this property, which is the enslaved, then therefore, the better thing to do is to not free enslaved people, right? So a pragmatist could make that argument, right? Because they feel the practical result, okay, it's not going. It's going to be impractical, right? So because it's impractical, then therefore they say it's not truth. Okay, all right, very very good, Sister Clayton, for pointing that out. Can anybody else think anybody else wants to comment on this? Do you all see how churches can sometimes fall into pragmatism too? Like churches will do what's pragmatic. So there's a decision that might be righteous, but it might make people mad. So there's some that will say, well, don't do it because it will make folks mad, but it is a righteous decision. That's a pragmatist speaking, right? That's a person that puts pragmatism over righteousness. And the point of these slides is pragmatism as an obstacle to righteousness. So when you think about John the Baptist, John the Baptist was one that was righteous, and righteous all the way to his death of being beheaded. And Herod was one that was being grossly pragmatic. And I'll break this up into 4 different quadrants here. Okay, there's 4 different quadrants, and I'll make sure you. Oh, I'm not sharing my screen. I'm so sorry. Let me share my screen. Hold on one second, so you can see this. I'm sorry. Forgive me. All right, there's 4 quadrants here. The 4 quadrants are a decision is righteous and practical. A decision is unrighteous but practical. a decision is righteous but impractical, or a decision is unrighteous and impractical. Okay, so 4 different quadrants of how righteousness and something being practical can interact.
Pardon me, Reverend Rogers.
Yes.
Are we supposed to be seeing something on the screen?
You still don't see it?
I don't. I'm wondering if anyone else does.
Okay, hold on. All right, let me try this again. Thank you for calling that out. Let me spotlight myself. There you go. And okay, there you are. All right, there you go. You should see it now. You see it now?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right. So do you need to see the definitions again? Anybody? So I put up these definitions earlier for righteousness and pragmatism. Okay. So all right. So the 4 quadrants are righteous and practical, unrighteous but practical, righteous but impractical, and unrighteous and impractical. Okay. So as you think, can you think of a decision, something that's both righteous and practical? All right, let me give.
I got one.
Go ahead.
Righteous and practical.
Yes.
People are without food and we need to feed them. So we go ahead and we take care of our homeless and our hungry.
Very good. Very good. Well, give me that example again. Give it to me again.
Taking care of our homeless and our hungry and feeding them and housing them.
Okay. All right. Very good. Okay. I can see that. But one could argue that the cost of feeding the cost of feeding the homeless is impractical. And so therefore you can't do it. Okay. Right. So one could, and we're going to show that example earlier. Now, one thing I want to point out about righteous and practical is that this is the easiest to do. It's the easiest to do. It's this is the low hanging fruit. And if you only pick these things, you can develop a dependence on low hanging fruit. So an example is praying for the poor. Praying for the poor doesn't cost anything. It doesn't, there's no real sacrifice of a sacrifice of time. Singing hymns. You want to sing some hymns? That doesn't really cost anything. You just sing the hymns and you move on. It's the easiest to do. Okay.
Reverend Rogers.
Yes.
I think what is righteous and practical for one may not be righteous and practical for another. And I'm thinking of getting rid of those AR-15 rifles.
The what?
AR-15 rifles.
Yes. All right. AR-15 rifles. But I would say that getting rid of AR. So I could let me show you this. So I could add to this one. I could add sending thoughts and prayers to shooting victims, to shooting massacre victims, right? I could add this to the list because if I send thoughts and prayers, it's righteous to pray and send thoughts, but it's also practical. But if you're going to go and take people's guns, it's not very practical. People are going to shoot. People may shoot at you.
Notice I didn't say guns.
Yeah.
I said the AR-15.
Yeah, and So even if you tried the AR-15s, right? It's so like that's not. I know this is very subjective, but to taking people's AR-15s or any weapon like an AR-15, SKs, M16s, any sort of assault rifles, taking them away, people may shoot at you. You're going to have to, put resources into getting them collected. It's going to be a, big fight. You have to fight lobbyists and all sorts of stuff. There's going to be all sorts of stuff happening around trying to do that. And so, that's not going to be very practical, but see, that's the reason why it hasn't been done, right? So those who want that to happen, they're not able to do it because it's hard to, and we'll talk more about that. Just let's put a thumbtack there. We'll get into that. We'll get that. That's coming up.
And that's why I said what's righteous and practical for one may not be righteous and practical for another.
Yeah,
and I see that in each of your 4 quadrants.
Yeah, I understand, but I do realize there's some subjectivity here. And if someone wants to shoot a hole through all of this and miss the principle that's being shared, you can do that. But at the end of the day, there are things that fit in these quadrants for all of us. And if you think about it, the reason why there hasn't been much movement, particularly in the conversation of gun control and these mass shootings, is because it is impractical. It simply is. If it was easy to do, it is impractical. It is impractical. If it is. You have to get money behind it. You have to get the votes behind it. Somebody has to be willing to give up political leverage. Somebody has to be willing to even possibly deal with people who respond violently with it. Those things are not practical things. Though that's not that's not a practical thing. If a person, and this is to Priscilla's point, if a person wants to keep peace, or if they care about not being voted out, or if they care about losing lobbyist dollars or whatever, then they're going to say, oh, wait a second, I'm going to lose a lot if I try to do this. And that's the reason why there hasn't been much traction on it, right? Because it isn't easy to do. It's hard to do. And I'm going to explain more with the other slide. So then you have the quadrant of unrighteous but practical. So something that is unrighteous but is practical to do. This is oftentimes the hardest to stop doing. It's the hardest to stop doing, right? Because it's practical, it works. It may bring in a lot of money, or it may be some sort of practical benefit to it, right? So, if you want to use guns, accepting lobbyist dollars or whatever, you can use whatever, whatever fill in the blank you want to you use. It makes it hard to stop doing. Somebody brought up slavery earlier, right? Why did slavery last so long? Why was there such a big bloody war? Right? Because while it was unrighteous, it was very practical for the South. It was something that worked for them. Okay. So examples are people's sacred cows. One for some people, and the example is an example could be used. It's like segregation. Some people thought segregation was very, very practical. They wanted things separate but equal. Okay, but a danger with this quadrant is that you can find yourself in perpetual unrighteousness and find yourself in idolatry. Okay, just flat out idolatry. Okay, the worshiping of money, the worshiping of things, putting something that's wrong over God. Okay, and so this is what Herod did. Herod said, it's easier for me to chop off John the Baptist's head than to upset Herodias, right? Than to look bad in front of my guests. So he did something that was very, very bad. Okay, and that was kill the prophet John the Baptist. Okay, all right. Then you have righteous but impractical. This is the hardest to start doing. An example would be a church eradicating hunger in their city. It's a righteous thing to do, but it's going to be very hard. It's going to be impractical. We have to get a lot of money, have to spend a lot of time, have to do a lot of things to get it done. It's hard to start doing. People tend not to want to do these sorts of things because it's hard to do. The danger with this is that temptation saying something righteous is unrighteous because it's impractical. So a person who has that mindset that I pointed out earlier of pragmatism, that a philosophical system that assumes that every truth or idea has practical consequence, and that these practical consequences are a critical test of its truthfulness. If a person thinks like that, then they might just say because something is impractical, that it is therefore unrighteous. Okay, just because it's going to be hard to do. So far, we've gone over righteous and practical. That's the easiest to do. It's easy to do it. Unrighteous but practical. It's the hardest to stop doing. Righteous but impractical. It's the hardest to start doing. And then finally, unrighteous and impractical. And this is the easiest not to do, right? It's unrighteous. It's not practical. It's easiest to avoid. Human sacrifice, right? It's not righteous to sacrifice humans, but it's also not practical. You know, the law be looking for you. It makes a bloody mess. You got to clean it up. You have to hide the person. It's all sorts of stuff. It's not practical at all. So you're not going to get much pushback in this category. Okay. So I want to take a moment just to go over these 4 quadrants briefly for us, and to just think about this when we have to face decisions, when we have to deal with change, right? When we feel heartburn with changes, when we have decisions that are hard to make and we have to figure out how we want to get through that decision, we got to ask ourselves, like, you know, am I putting pragmatism over righteousness? Now, don't get me wrong. There's nothing wrong with being practical. There's nothing wrong with being wise and all those things, and being a good steward. All of those things fall under being practical, right? There's nothing wrong with having a 401k and taking care of all of that stuff. All of those things are good things to do. Those are good things to do. All right. However, the problem with pragmatism is when it overtakes what is righteous. That's the problem with it. Normally, going back to going back to our text for tonight, we pull up our text. Normally, it would be no problem with Herod trying to keep his oath. It would be no problem with Herod to keep his oath in front of his guests. What made it wrong? What was wrong about it was that Herod put what was righteous, which was, you know, sparing the life of John the Baptist, he put that under what was practical, and that was not looking bad in front of his guests and in front of Herodias. Okay. So, any comments on this before we move on? All right. So, there's not any comments. Let us move ahead into the next set of scriptures. All right. So now we're going to be looking at Jesus feeding the 5,000. And what time is it? We have enough time. I think we have enough time. So let me read this now. Give me 1 second. Okay. Let's see. All right. The apostles gathered around Jesus and told them all that they had done and taught. He said to them, "Come away to a deserted place all by yourselves and rest a while." For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. And they went away in the boat to a deserted place by themselves. Now many saw them going and recognized them, and they hurried there on foot from all towns and arrived ahead of them. So what we see here is that by the time Jesus gets to this text, by the time we get to this text, we the readers, by the time Jesus gets here, the disciples and Jesus have developed a name for themselves, to the point where Jesus is having to search for a deserted place so he can get some rest. So one thing that we can point out about this text is just the importance of rest. I know that there's some workaholics on the line. People, you know, work, and that's fine to work. You know, you should work. Praise the Lord. But you got to find time for yourself to rest as well. Okay. You know, you're no greater than God, and even God rested. Okay. In creation, and that is in creation to show us the importance of rest. Okay. So Jesus was trying to rest, but why are they searching for a deserted place? Because many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. So the disciples were so busy they couldn't even eat, and they went away in the boat to a deserted place by themselves. And many saw them going and recognized them, and they hurried there on foot from all the towns and arrived ahead of them. So by this time, Jesus is very, very popular. And as he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion for them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And he began to teach them many things. And I highlight this text as, you know, this text is a reminder to anybody in ministry, anybody that serves in ministry. Okay, this text is a reminder to you to be patient with church folks. the best you can. Okay. Jesus wanted to find a place to rest. The disciples wanted to rest. They were tired. They were hungry. They wanted a deserted place just to rest for a while. They had been doing nothing but nonstop ministry. But did the people give them that? No. The people searched for them and found them even in the deserted place when they were just trying to rest and get some eat. Now, be honest. How many of us would be frustrated about this? How many of us would be upset? Anybody? Be mad? Be irritated?
About which part, Pastor?
Okay. All right. Would you be irritated about, you're the disciples, you're hungry. The text says here that you've been working so hard, you didn't have time to eat. You're trying to find yourself a deserted place so you can rest, so you can eat. And the people find you anyway. They find you. They want more from you.
Yep, that's irritating.
All right. Okay. All right. God bless you for speaking up. I love it. I thank you. Thank you so much.
Absolutely irritating. And no matter what examples that have been in our holy writ, yet we still do it. We can go as far back to the Old Testament and Moses and what Jethro saw. Jethro looked at Moses and all the people continued to come to him. He basically, to paraphrase it, he was like, man, they're gonna kill you. You need some help. Because what happens is, believe it or not, and I hope I'm not out of place by saying this, but in a lot of incidences, what happens is in Christianity, what we do is those of us that are not the pastor, some people become dependent on the pastor, and they go to their leadership for everything, and feel some kind of way if the leader does not come at their beck and call or answer their every call. But one of the things that's not said, and it's something that I experienced when I pastored, is people don't realize that, and we do that, especially when the pastor is married with children, we're taking away from that family. And so it can be draining on the pastor, on the leaders, when people are constantly, going to over little things. And if the leader is not mentally strong enough, it could really cause that person to go to a place where they just totally shut down altogether. Right. I've seen that for many years. I've seen that. I've seen pastors who experienced burnout because of that very thing. And I'm not going to say anything else.
Yes. Very good observations, Reverend. I appreciate that. And most commendable. And as I study this text, one thing that always spoke out to me is, what Jesus did. Even though this is very irritating, as my dear sister, Sister Clayton pointed out, and y'all know y'all will be irritated. All right, so don't nobody judge Sister Clayton. Okay, a lot of folks be irritated. A lot of folks get irritated if you preach too long and there's a fellowship meal after church. They irritated over that. Okay, and they ate breakfast that morning. Okay, so verse 34, it says that he had compassion for them. And that's the thing right there. Having compassion for somebody, even when they are irritating you. That's it. Having compassion. Why? Because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And he began to teach them many things. And I think that I really would like to lay my hat here. If I had more time, I really would lay my hat here. And what I would say about this is that it's easy to show compassion for a person when you know their whole story, when you know their story. Sometimes the reason why we don't show compassion is because we don't know them. Okay? When you get to know a person and you know where they come from, what they've been through, what they are going through, what they are enduring, what they are having to face at that time, it's much easier to show compassion, right? And so that's why it's so helpful when you find a person irritating you to try to take a moment to get to know them. And you'll find that when you get to know a person, sometimes you'll understand better why they do the crazy things that they do. You might not end up agreeing with them, but you might end up being able to show them compassion because Jesus knew what their situation was. He said they are like sheep without a shepherd. And because he understood this about them, he was able to show them compassion. Verse 35 says, when it grew late, and let me point out, he began to teach them many things. Okay, so that's also a critical part as well. All right, there's being willing to be taught. All right, and for teachers being willing to teach, even when your mate might be irritated. Verse 35 says, when it grew late, his disciples came and said, "This is a deserted place, and the hour is not very late. Send them away, so that they may go into a surrounding country and village and buy something for themselves to eat." Okay. So, just because I wasn't going to bring this up for this text, but I mean, what were the disciples being here? The disciples were being what? What were they being here? I mean, they were being rather pragmatic, hey, it was late. Let's send them off. We're tired. We done everything for these people. Let's send them away. Verse 37, he answered them, "You give them something to eat." All right, so here we have the contrast again. Disciples want to do something pragmatic, send these folks away who are in need, these sheep who are without a shepherd. Jesus wants to do something else. Jesus says, what's he say? You give them something to eat. Jesus does what's righteous. Okay? Even though the people might have been annoying, even though they might have been following him around, not letting him get any rest, not letting the disciples eat, what you see is the contrast here between what was pragmatic and what was righteous. Now, the problem is when you face this crossroads, the problem you find is the problem is people say we don't have the resources. Now, I think back to church I used to work with in Arkansas during my time in Arkansas. I'm not from Arkansas. I'm from North Carolina. Some people think I'm from Arkansas. I'm not. I'm from North Carolina. I did my first degree in Arkansas, and I worked with a church while I did that degree. And I wanted to have community appreciation meals because I wasn't a big fan of like feed the hungry meals and all this sorts of stuff because I felt like you had to admit that you were different. You were the other to even walk into the door. I'm the different one. I'm the other. I'm hungry man. I'm hungry woman. And I think that was a way of creating like a sort of class strata. Like, we have the food, you have the hunger, and creating these two. So I said, let's get rid of that dichotomy and let's just have a community appreciation meal. This way we're not making them condescend to be with us, if that makes sense. We're not making them feel like they're beneath us. we're gonna have a community appreciation meals. And I had a person in the church. They said we don't have the money to have community appreciation meals. And I said, well, you don't need the money. It's a potluck in reverse. The members, the same way we have potlucks and we all bring food dishes to feed ourselves. We're gonna bring those dishes instead of feeding ourselves. We're gonna feed the community. You know, that's what we'll do. And then the person said, oh well, still, we should support it with some sides, and we don't have money for sides. You don't have money for a can of string beans. We don't have money to buy some string beans for the sides for these main dishes. And so what ended up happening was when the community found out that we were going to have community appreciation meals, a person came to me and said, I'm going to give you $3,000 to pay for those meals.
Yep.
Okay. So just a person from the community, not even, that wasn't a person in the church. It was a person from the community who wasn't even a church member, but they liked what we were trying to do. And what I want to speak to about things that are righteous but seem impractical is that if you follow God, God will provide. If you do what God's called you to do, God will provide. And that's what we find here happening. It says, Jesus answered, but give them something to eat. And they said to him, how are we to go and buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give them to eat? He said to them, how many loaves have you? Go and see. And when they have found out, they said 5 and 2 fish. Then he ordered them to get all the people to sit down in groups on the grass. So they sat down in groups of hundreds and of 50s. And taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and blessed and broke the loaves and gave them to his disciples to set before the people. And he divided the 2 fish among them all, and all ate and were filled. And they took up 12 baskets full of broken pieces and of the fish. Those who had eaten the loaves numbered 5,000 men. That doesn't include the women and children who also ate. So we know the number is more than 5,000. So what can we learn from this text before I close? What we can learn is we just got to simply do what's righteous, folks. And God will take care of us. I mean, and again, I'm not trying to say throw caution to the wind, but what I am trying to say is we must not allow for things being practical or impractical to get in the way of us doing what is righteous. What is righteous must come first. And if we step out on righteousness, then we'll see God do some mighty wonders and miracles around us. And that's what God did here. With very limited resources, they were able to feed 5,000 people. Now, the resources should not be what stops us from doing ministry. God doesn't call us to do beyond what we can. God calls us to do what we can, and then God will take us beyond what we can do. Use the loaves and fish you got at that time to do the work you can do, and watch God expand that to beyond what you ever dreamed of. All right, this is my close. Are there any closing questions or comments?
Yes, I do have a question.
Sure.
So this is Miss Avery. I'm with Miss King. So my question is, so when you say do what's righteous, so are you equating that to what your faith, what you believe in, or you understand what I'm saying? What are you equating the righteous part to? When you say that we need to follow what is righteous, because is that the same as saying, okay, so we need to have faith in whatever, because, okay, where I'm coming from with that is the 5,000 were fed, but they all believed. They all believed that Jesus was going to make a way. They didn't know how, but they all believed that one way or another, he was going to make a way. So is that what you're referring to when you say righteousness? That's my question.
Huh.
I'm sorry to stump you.
No, I'm not stumped. I'm just trying to understand what you're asking. Can you rephrase? I'm kind of lost. And can you rephrase the question?
Sure. So you were saying that we should do what is righteous, not what we think can be done or what we think within our limited capacity can be accomplished, but to basically trust God, to have faith in him and know that he's going to provide a way. So is that what you're equating to righteousness? When you say follow what's righteous and do what's righteous, is that what you're saying, to have faith and trust God? You're equating them as being the same thing?
Well, no, more so when I say righteous, I mean that there are some decisions that we have to make in life that are clearly right decisions as opposed to wrong, right? So, here in this text, there's an example. Let me share my screen again. These people came to Jesus, and Jesus recognized their situation. He said they were like sheep without a shepherd, and they were hungry. The disciples wanted to send them away, but that's not necessarily. That's not really the righteous thing to do, And these folks are hungry, and to send them away. Although the disciples were tired and were wanting to rest and were hungry themselves, Jesus instead does what's righteous. And the word righteousness in the Hebrew is synonymous with the word justice or just. Jesus does what is just here, right? He does what's just. And he decides to feed them, but he feeds them out of very meager resources. Okay. They said to him, the disciples said, are we to go? And this is a sarcastic question. This was not a serious question. It was sarcastic. He said, are we to go and buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give it to them to eat? Right. So they were already approaching this task of feeding these people from a very pessimistic place. They would rather rest. But Jesus had his heart set on what was right. And my point is that sometimes the impracticality of something can block us from imagining what God can do if we simply stick to what is just. Okay? So that's more so the point I'm trying to make with this. Does that make sense?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Very good. All right. Anybody else?
Pastor, I think maybe if I'm not mistaken, I think she was asking something about relative to faith, right? In other words, do you have to have faith in order for things to? Sometimes you have to have faith and just go for it, even though you don't see the outcome, you don't see it being something that is practical. But if you have, is it a part of faith? I'm not sure if that's what she was asking, but that's what I see.
Okay, well, I definitely would agree. I think it requires faith to step out on righteousness. You see that with John the Baptist. John the Baptist was taught to preach the truth, and he told Herod that he was wrong for his marriage. That was something that was not practical at all. It was very impractical for him to say that to the king, but he said it anyway because he had the faith that pushed him to be righteous at all costs.
Right.
So I was
doing his disciples. You have to have faith in order to accomplish something sometimes.
That's exactly right. Yes.
He was teaching his disciples as well as the people.
That's exactly right. Amen.
Thank you. Yeah, saying that differently, because that's basically what I was driving at. That
okay.
If faith is there and you trust him, you're going to already do what's just, no matter how it looks, because you already trust God to make it happen.
Yes.
And human limitations on God. And you know what I'm saying?
That's right. Very good. I know what you're saying. Thank you. So happy that I was able to clear that up. All right. Very good. Any other questions before we close?
Reverend Rogers, later on, I want to ask you about that feeding the community.
Okay. All right. No problem. I look forward to it. All right. If there's no more questions, I'm going to ask Reverend Pennington if he could close us out in prayer.
Amen. I don't have anything with me to write. Are there any prayer requests? Are there any prayer requests before we end in prayer?
Okay, yes, I do have my prayer request. And for tonight we have the little girl that drowned.